Thank you, Mr. President, members of the body. We have before us Senate Bill 1 as it's amended by Senate Committee Substitute 1. We were last in these chamber walls. I think the comment may have been made by one of my colleagues that we were in the middle of a pandemic when we were looking with legislation. I think that was House Bill 208 at that time, of trying to make changes and improvements as we were getting ready to start this school year. And I don't know if we still are in the middle of a pandemic, we're at the end of that pandemic, or what part that we're actually in, but we know that even the start of this school year has shown us interrupted by COVID-19, Delta variant, every other type of issue that comes with that. We were hoping that have interrupted lives because of COVID-19. The purpose of Senate Bill 1, as amended by the committee substitute, is to prioritize in-person learning. I don't think there's an educator, a school administrator, a parent, a fellow legislator, or anyone that I talk to doesn't wish that we have in-person learning. We know last year that teachers went above and beyond, parents went above and beyond, students went above and beyond. Everyone did to do their part in the educational process, and that was having to adjust to virtual learning. For some students, it worked very well. For some students, it did not work well at all. For some parents, they absolutely got gray, as I am getting, because of virtual learning and having to adjust and having to help and having to be an educator within our own homes. But to prioritize in-person learning, we have to look at fixes for the now. We have to look at ways we can approach legislation now to help school districts across the Commonwealth. And by doing so, Senate Bill 1 will help stabilize school funding. It'll go back to what was asked of us by school superintendents and others, to go back to the model of the average daily attendance for SEEK funding for 2022-23. Many people watching may think, well, that's a year away. That's how school funding works. We have to budget for the future. And so with that, it will allow districts to select either the 2018-2019 model or the 2019-2020 attendance model for data in lieu of using school district attendance data for 21-22. We know that because of quarantining, we know because of positive tests, contact tracing, or other issues that schools may be facing, that absentees and absences are causing a high number of districts to simply say, we need help and we need support. So attendance growth will be addressed during the 2022 session when we come back. It also, with Senate Bill 1, gets into assisting staffing shortages. We know because of COVID-19, we've seen a number of our districts have to use NTI days or have to adjust, sometimes on the fly, of getting substitute teachers, other staffing issues that have taken place with bus drivers, cafeteria workers. So with the staffing issue, we're saying that unless quarantined, at least the certified staff must perform work duties, and with that, the work that's being done to help push forth background checks, to help expedite background checks for this 2022 school year, the superintendents may employ all individuals on a probationary status period after receiving initial background approval from the Kentucky Administrative Office of the Courts, or also while pending receipts of a Kentucky State Police background check. We also heard from a number of superintendents and educators because of staffing needs of getting retired teachers back into the school buildings to help. And so for retired staff, this would expire, though, in January 15th of 2022 when we come back into regular session. The districts may hire certified or classified retirees after only a 1-month break in their employment. So those as of August 1st of this year, we could bring them back instead of the 90-day threshold, a 30-day window. And a district may also hire retired teachers up to the equivalent of 10% of their existing certified employees. So try to bring those teachers back in. We've worked this out with the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System of changes that were made, making sure yesterday with the committee sub and that we were not in violation of any kind of federal tax code. And also for attendance purposes, of things we can also utilize for schools to do is instead of being on the 170 instructional days, moving that for some flexibility with the equivalent of 1,062 hours to utilize local control and discretion of being more flexible in starting the day early, starting the day later, by moving a calendar by 15 or 20 minutes on a daily routine that can make up those days. Also in terms of operationally within the school, we have statutorily of last session what we did with non-traditional instruction days, most commonly known as NTI days. Some districts have already used NTI days because they were uncertain of the funding situation, which we are now putting forward with this bill, but also because of quarantine, also because of staffing. Some districts have already used some of those NTI days. If you've used any of those days to this point, there will be no more NTI days given. If you've kept those 10 NTI days in your reserve or your back pocket, you still have those. But for NTI specifically, no additional NTI days will be given going forward with this bill. However, what we're doing is more of a tactical, surgical procedure to looking at absenteeism for districts. It's called temporary remote instruction. And I must say to my fellow members, this is something with the idea of the Kentucky Department of Education that had brought to us alongside the governor after last Wednesday's Education Committee meeting of saying, we think we've got an idea. How does this idea look? Everything we're going off of here with remote and temporary instruction days is what was given to us and shared with us. What we're looking at this is districts may temporarily shift to a remote instruction for a targeted school. That could be a school building, a targeted grade, a targeted classroom, or any other group depending on the level of COVID disruption as it's articulated in the local school board's plan going forward. So by looking at this right now, when you see some districts that are being caught up because an elementary school has got an outbreak or a large quarantine situation that's happening, a district saying, we're closing because of the elementary school. The middle school and high school, not so bad, but we're closing because of the elementary. These 20 temporary days would give the superintendent, along with their policy that they developed, to look at the elementary school and say, let's put them on remote, but let's not shut down the middle school and high school. If it's a classroom, if it's a grade, look at that. Now, there's 20 of these given. 20 of these. But when we look at the funding that we've put back in this with the average daily attendance, the flexibility of still having those 10 NTI days if they have them, and looking at this from this approach, we're hoping this will give the districts the flexibility that they may need to get through this semester. Now, if you look at where we are in the semester, I talked to a superintendent this morning. He said, Senator Wise, we have 60 days left to get us through to January. For this particular district, there may not all be the same. Now, that's 60 days. That's not including a fall break. That's not including Thanksgiving break. That's not including Christmas break. I think what we're looking to do here is a fair and flexible method that superintendents can get behind. You're very good and creative, intelligent superintendents out there that I know well, I've worked with. They can be able to adjust and they can be able to do this. The fix here, folks, is the quarantine issue. So many non-positive students have gotten caught up in a quarantine issue that's driving parents absolutely crazy. Of a kid that's sent home or told to go home because of a positive in a class that's not affected that particular student of being positive, but being sent home. 10 days. Some school children have been in and out of this because of a quarantine issue. The student has no symptoms, no positive, but they're home. That has got to change. This bill is helpful of giving districts that change. We've heard, if you remember the Education Committee, if you're not, it's been in the media, and I appreciate the attention that's been given to this, called Test to Stay. Some districts have done this very well. My districts have, and some of my school districts back in South Central Kentucky. But one in particular we had was Greene County. Greene County Superintendent Will Hodges testified in front of our Education Committee and said, working with their federal qualified health centers, they do a test to stay policy. The student then, if there's a positive in the class, instead of shutting down the other, let's say 30 kids in the class, the 29 then can test. Test to stay. Rapid tests that are done. Takes about 15 minutes for that class to be brought in. Test that student. You're negative, stay in the classroom. Next day, negative, stay in the classroom. Parents have to approve this testing or not model. This bill will have the Kentucky Department of Public Health modeling test to stay. Districts don't have to agree to do this. It's an option. Once again, it's not a mandate, but it's the option to look to do test to stay. We have an appropriation bill that has test to stay that's going to be there for helping to give money for this model to go out there. But with this, with the local control, I want every health department across the Commonwealth to hear my plea. Work with your school districts. We need consistency. We need those to conform to what we're wanting to do, because some community health departments are not being equal with others. We have to get this aligned and do it well. And that's exactly what this bill will do. It will tie then the local health departments of working with local school boards on their district plans and protocols. So let's talk about then that local plan, that local protocol of what we're doing here as well. This bill will also nullify, null and void, the Kentucky Board of Education's mandated masking protocol, which was put forth by the Kentucky Board of Education. Remember, the same Board of Education that is made up of members that are appointed by the governor, but that are confirmed by us in the Senate. But if we are the policymakers, if we are the ones that represent our districts, we are the ones that set policy, this bill returns that policy back to us to make the decision to say no more mask mandates by the Kentucky Board of Education. This bill will give local control back to the districts, not mandating they do, not mandating they don't. They make the decision of what they think is best for their constituents and their communities. Local elected school board members working with superintendents, working with teachers, working with parents to say, what's best for our county? What's best for our district? Those districts, those school boards, if Senate Bill 1 goes through, will have 5 working days from the effective date of this act to come up with their local approved, school board approved plan of what they wish to do regarding protocols, masking, non-masking, plans, procedures. That is going to be given back to local controlled decision making. The local school boards would submit to the Kentucky Department of Education for informational purposes only what their publicly available COVID-19 school operational plans are. And I want to repeat that, that's informational only. The Kentucky Department of Education cannot tell a district once that's submitted what they can and can't do. Informational purposes only by the Kentucky Department of Education. I've touched on also the NTI. I've touched on the remote learning. I've touched on the ability for staffing. But one thing I also want to make clear, and I didn't touch on it earlier, when talking about that remote learning is different than NTI. There's many members of this legislative body that were here before me. I look across the way and I see many of them that came before. NTI was a fix for bad weather. It was a fix for districts that face flooding. It was a fix for districts that needed emergency relief. It was not a long-term solution. It was not nothing to continue with information that would be given out. And our teachers did very well last year to kind of adjust and act upon NTI, but we know that for the most part, many times did not suffice for a full day of learning. The remote target instructional day is a 6-hour educational day where the educator will be in their classroom. The educator will be going to the school building, to the school classroom that they work in, and delivering that online method to that class, that building, whoever that group may be. So there's a huge difference between before sending an NTI assignment home, but now having that instructional method as it's delivered going forward. Is the bill perfect? No. I've never seen a perfect bill. I've never had a perfect bill of my own. There's always something in there. It's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. A little too cold, really, really hot. Trying to find out what we can be able to pass and what we can be able to salvage at this time, because this is for the now. Are we back here in January? Yes. Will we deal with other issues facing COVID-19 or whatever we may deal with? Yes. This is a tactical approach to the now. And when Senator from Clay mentioned this one day in the Education Committee, we're going to have to get strategic on this too. Because if we don't, we're going to be coming right back in August saying, here we are again. We've got to manage it for the time being, get the relief and the flexibility that districts need now, provide that in-person learning as much as a routine as possible to allow children to learn and allow that learning to be in person. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions from any of my fellow members. If there's anything also within the bill that I may have not touched on, I'm also happy to go into anything else in detail.
Matter for the body is Senate Bill 1 as amended by Senate Committee Substitute Number 1. Any members seeking recognition for the purpose of question or discussion? Senator from Fayette, 13.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Senator from Taylor has certainly highlighted the nature of Senate Bill 1. But we need to talk about where we are presently. And he's talked about the pandemic and its effects on this state and this country. But we need to put that really in terms of what we've seen over the last 18 months. Here in Kentucky, we've seen 610,000 cases of the coronavirus, 8,000 deaths. 3 of those deaths have involved children 18 and under. Unfortunately, 1 just this past week. As the governor has noted when he asked for this extraordinary session, most of that occurred with the previous strain of COVID virus. We now have a new COVID virus here in this nation that's even far more deadly and far more contagious. In fact, if we just talk about children under 18, Mr. President, we've seen hospitalizations in the last 2 months gone from 1,200 children just under 18 now to those exceeding 4,100. More than tripled, almost quadrupled the number of hospitalizations just for children under the age of 18. Senator Taylor is right. We do want to open our schools. We had a lost year last year because of the COVID pandemic. We don't want to repeat that. But, Mr. President, we want that return to be safe. So how can we make it safe? Well, the wisest part of us should tell us that we look to see what the experts say. What do experts say regarding how can we return to school safely? In its most recent update, the Center for Disease Control, commonly known as the CDC, has said that, and I'm going to repeat, due to the circulating and highly contagious Delta variant, which I just talked about, the CDC recommends universal indoor masking by all students age 2 and older, staff, teachers, and visitors to K-12 schools regardless of vaccination status, okay? And just for the record, I just want the public to know that now that vaccinations can take place for those children 12 and under, we've vaccinated here in Kentucky now 33% of those students between ages of 12 and 17, which means that 2/3 of all 12 through 17-year-olds here in Kentucky remain unvaccinated, okay? But our authoritative expert here in the nation recommends universal masking for everyone associated with schools. But don't let me stop there. Another highly respected authoritative body here in this nation, the American Academy of Pediatricians, has also weighed in on this. Again, consistent with what the Senator Taylor said, we want our kids to return to school safely, okay? And what the American Academy of Pediatrics has said, Mr. President, in its recommendation, is that all students older than 2-year-olds and all school staff, again, that includes teachers, our classified staff, visitors, should, not may, should wear face masks at schools, parenthetically, unless medical or developmental conditions prohibit use. So now, we've been told by the two most authoritative bodies here in the nation that yes, let students return to school. But to do so safely, there must be universal wearing of masks. But what are we about ready to do here today in Kentucky with the eyes of the nation watching us? We have said in the first 2 sections of this bill that actions by the governor and by our leading education body to mandate mask wearing for schools, we want to abolish it as a legislature. We want to ignore the authorities. We want to ignore all the health concerns. We want to ignore what's safe for our children and say, we're going to abolish that. Okay. Now, yes, I know my opponents will say, well, no, we're going to return that to local control. You know, we're going to leave that up to the local school boards. You know, that sounds good, Mr. President, until we realize that there is no local control over this virus. This virus has no local control. You know, it knows no county borders, knows no city borders, knows no state borders, knows no national borders. Now, Mr. President, as the Kentucky Senate, you know, we can't control what happens in the other 49 states or in the District of Columbia or in the U.S. territories. We can't control that. We can't stop the virus from spreading past our borders. But we can do everything, Mr. President, to stop the spread of the virus here in Kentucky, which, as I've already highlighted, has led to many deaths, a lot more cases, and some deaths, including our young people. Okay. But what we do, Mr. President, today is abdicate that in the face of science. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the floor amendments that I had filed today to really correct this problem, or at least to try to weaken it. My first floor amendment actually takes language from a bill we're going to consider later, and you'll hear me say more about this, talk about that bill, Senate Bill 2. And there's language in there that I really like that says that the centers that we want to create from Senate Bill 2 will be used to, those centers will be used to advertise, advance, create, publicize information about the vaccine so we can encourage people in the state to get vaccination. Because as we heard from Senator Kenton just yesterday, as we hear from the experts all the time, vaccinations work. We hear that all the time, vaccinations work. And what we should do, as I've said repeatedly this week is use our schools, just like we've used them traditionally, as community centers to encourage getting the use of the vaccine. But again, because of the process of this body, which prohibits floor amendments from being heard when a new bill is filed and voted on the same day, that amendment is ruled out of order. That's one floor amendment that I think should be in this bill, that our schools should be used as centers to promote, encourage, advertise getting the use of vaccines. The second part, or another one of my floor amendments, is to say that since we're going to send our teachers back into an unsafe environment, because again, we're eliminating masks now, that at the very least, if those teachers catch this COVID, this new COVID strain, and they have to be quarantined or be treated, that we provide them paid leave different from traditional sick leave, so they can get the proper care without having to being made to use their own sick leave or pay for that care. But again, that floor amendment was out of order. If we're going to send our teachers back into an unsafe environment, we should pay for that. The teachers should not pay for that. We should pay for that care. Okay? The Senator from Taylor talks about the stay-at-home model, or stay and retain model, the stay and retain model, which is that if there's a positive test in a school or classroom, then we remove that student and continually test students while they're in school to see if they have the virus. And we do that for 5 straight days. As he indicated, the Greene County School Superintendent testified about this stay and retain model last week, and it has some benefits. Okay. And I'm not opposed to that model. But the issue I raised about that model, and the issue I raised about it today, is the cost of that model. What's going on in Greene County now is that there is a medical care provider that's paying for those tests. Now, people of Kentucky should know that the average cost of these tests is $96. That's a lot of money. Okay? And I know there's been conversations that perhaps K-CHIP or Medicaid can pay for some of that, or private pay. But at least in the private pay cases, you have to pay up front and then get reimbursed for that. And at $96 a day for 5 straight days, that's a huge cost. Now, we might say the state could pay for that. Right? Well, let's look at the population we're talking about, Mr. President, and this body should know who that population is. Currently here in Kentucky, there are about 650,000 students in public schools. That's our school-based public population, 650,000 students. There are about 90,000 teachers and staff. Okay? That's public schools. Let's go to private schools. Currently here in Kentucky, there are approximately 215,000 students that attend private schools, K through 12. And then you've got about another 30,000 staff on top of that. So when you just do the straightforward math, Mr. President, you're talking about close to 1 million people that are involved in education daily here in Kentucky, both public and private. Now, the positivity rate here in Kentucky now ranges anywhere from 10 to 13%. We're in the double digits. Okay? But I'm just going to be a bit optimistic here. Let's say that only about 7.5% of those individuals in the school system get tested positive, and we adopt this stay and retain model. Okay. At $96 a day for 5 days, if you're talking about a 7.5% positivity rate, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but you're talking about the state spending about $16 million a day. Now, currently in this state, we have about $134 million that's set aside from funds to deal with testing. Okay? $134 million from federal funds. At $16 million a week, Mr. President, okay, you're gonna run out of money after 8 weeks. Okay? Now, it was also brought to my attention that there's a model being used in Fayette County. Fayette County is looking at this model. I want all Lexingtonians to listen to this as to what's going on in Fayette County. That is indeed true, that Fayette County now is looking at the stay and retain model. But it's a model, interestingly, that's being pushed by the CDC, because the CDC has developed some interest in this stay and retain model. And they're using Lexington as one of their urban test sites to see how it can be employed in urban settings. But the Lexington test is only for 2 weeks. They're only going to do it for 2 weeks. And this stay and retain model that's being utilized in Lexington, public health. And that's only for 2 weeks. After that, the stay and retain model in Lexington ends until further developments and further analysis by the CDC. Okay. So you've got a huge cost here that someone's going to have to pay for if we develop the stay and retain model. And again, I approve it, but we've got to worry about how we pay for it. Finally, Mr. President, there was a lot of discussion about remote instruction and NTI days. What I find most interesting is that we want to return local control by banning the statewide mask mandate for all schools, and yet give local control to school or impose a statewide control on how many NTI days and how many remote instruction days schools can use. So we say we want local control on the one hand, but we want statewide mandates when it comes to the number of days schools can be out on the other. That's an inconsistency that I can't fathom, but I'll leave that discussion more to my colleagues. I'll close with this, Mr. President. I think we need to save our children. We do a lot of important work up here, but very few times do the bills we address deal with life and death. But this is one of those rare occasions that this bill that we're talking about today is really a life and death bill. And if we eliminate mask mandates, then we are putting all children and all school personnel at severe risk. And I cannot tolerate that. So I intend to vote no on this because, Mr. President, I want to save our children, and I want to protect the future generations of all Kentuckians. Thank you.
Seeking recognition for the purpose of question or comment on the bill. Senator from Green.
Mr. President, I rise to speak in support of Senate Bill 1.
Please proceed.
The Senator from Fayette 13 and I often will engage in some very productive and robust conversations around education policy, especially interesting to me in light of the differences in his urban region and my rural region. I want to address a couple of things that he's spoken to very specifically, one of those being the concern about COVID exposures in schools and teachers not having access to additional sick days. Any COVID resulting, Mr. President, we had a conversation about this moments ago in caucus, any COVID resulting from workplace exposure is not something that should concern additional sick days because that is a workplace related activity that's going to be covered under workers' comp as I understand it.
That's right.
So there would be no cost of sick days to a teacher who incurs COVID as a result of workplace exposure. So let's check that box and dispel the concerns around that portion. The conversation about test to stay has been interesting because it has a lot of momentum And I think it correlates to a lot of the interest that individuals have, especially professional educators on the front line that are teachers, administrators, and community leaders that care so very much for these children, knowing that the best place for these kids to learn is in school, in that small, tight-knit community that supports them both educationally and in so many other ways. So I think we all agree that children in school is the best place. I want to address the $96 a day cost question for the testing and some of the numbers we've seen that seem to indicate, and I don't want to presume something from what I read that's not written clearly, but when people start providing numbers to defeat or move an issue in a certain direction, when those numbers are intended to sway, as it appears some of these astronomical cost numbers seem to sway the direction away from test to stay, that concerns me. Because this is a policy that is going to fit, I think, in Fayette County after the tests are run. It certainly is fitting in Greene County. As my superintendent indicated a week and a half ago, 22 consecutive days of in-person education happening in that Greene County district. But I want to share a bit of a fun aside on the $96 a day conversation. Years ago, when my wife was teaching and my 3 children were all in public school and before they'd all graduated from our small rural district there in Greene County, we would have this conversation on snow days. And my children, as so many across the Commonwealth, when the snow starts falling and there's a little bit on the yard, everybody's like, Dad, can we stay up late? What about a movie? Dad, why can't we start to think about a snow day? Will they call and cancel school? And I'd been elected to the legislature and had had the chance to work on some policy by then around this question, and I would say, you know what that costs, don't you? Matthew Gibbons, do you know what that costs the taxpayers of the Commonwealth for you to go one day in school? He'd say, no, Dad, I don't know. $17 million for us to educate, and that's taxpayer money, $17 million for one day of education. So Matthew, you want a snow day? It's going to cost $17 million. Perspective is always good for us. $96 a day for testing for one student, $17 million a day, ballpark number, for the cost of K-12 education in the Commonwealth. The question arose in the committee discussion about test to stay about how is this funded at the local district level. I'm not certain the number of districts that are utilizing some or any form of this. A number I'd heard was 22. I don't know if it's that large or not, but I think there's a lot of interest there. Who pays for it? In our Greene County district, our local provider that's coordinating services in our school systems is accessing a federal grant to pay for the testing. Federal government money is paying for the testing in my local district. And I would presume if the federal government is implementing a pilot in Fayette County, they're paying for the testing of that pilot in Fayette County. And I would certainly presume that the federal government is very rapidly working on policies and funding to address the test-to-stay model. So, Mr. President, I'd like to dispel any myths around the concerns about the effectiveness of the model, and I certainly want to echo the words that so many have said. Our children need to be in schools. They need to be in person. It needs to be done safely, but they need to be there for community, for families, for workplace, and for their education. Thank you, and I proudly encourage all members to vote in support of Senate Bill 1.
Any other member seeking recognition for the purpose of question or discussion? Senator from Jefferson 33 sat down. Jefferson 37 stands up. Senator from Jefferson 37.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speak on the measure.
Please proceed.
Mr. President, we're here on a Senate bill without any amendments or ability to change. So what we're left with as a body is is what we have before us better than what we don't have? I think the answer is clearly, obviously it is. We have a duty to act. My colleagues have brought up several issues and problems. Again, it's one of the dangers of politics. A lot of times is you don't get everything you want, but the hope is you get something better. I do want to draw to our attention, though, the test to stay model. I too, like so many of us, have said we need our kids in school. They do better in school, and it's a heck of a lot easier on us parents too. The test to stay model, my limited research is saying in order to be effective, the students have to be wearing a mask because it limits the exposure. So if they're unmasked, well then the amount of students that otherwise would have been exposed would be multiplied significantly. In a school district like Jefferson County Public Schools and things like that, it almost wouldn't work without that requirement. I have a strong belief that as written, the superintendent in many of our school districts will have a mask mandate. I'm all for local control. In fact, you've heard me in my limited time in this Senate stand up and speak to the need for have local control. I'm also for checks and balances. And this body said that we are linked, that it reached a level, and this body could have made that determination that we step in. Then in the event that a superintendent's not willing to make the right decision, there's some type of check. It's not in here. I have faith in this body that if that problem occurs, I hope we'll be back here. I hope we'll correct that then. I just wish that we could have corrected it here today. Unfortunately, because of the procedure, which I'm still learning, that we're unable to file those amendments to make those changes. So we're left with a little bit better, but not the best. My question, reading this over and over again, to the sponsor, if the senator for Green would yield to a question, it would be helpful.
Senator from Green or Senator from Taylor?
Senator for Taylor?
Senator from Taylor, will you yield to a question?
I will yield.
He will yield.
Still learning my counties too, Senator.
Only 10 miles apart.
That's right. The bill that's limiting to the additional 20 days of NTI, obviously, again, what I'm saying, that is an improvement because it increases the 10, and our schools need more flexibility. How is that calculated? In the event that, and I use Jefferson County Public Schools because that's what I'm familiar with, in the event that one or two high schools decide that they have to do NTI, would that only count towards that school for that 20 days, or would that be for the school district? Or can that be brought all the way down to the classrooms in the event that there's a classroom where there's exposure and those students have to do NTI for 20 days? Would that count to the entire school or to the entire district?
Senator from Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. President. So if we're looking at Jefferson County, if it were to be Jeffersontown High School, Valley Middle School, if they chose to both close, that would be the day. So it would be going forward from there. So if it's targeted in for an elementary school, if it's targeted for middle school or a classroom, that would be a day the district's using for that. It would start from then for that number of which individual school that would be assigned to.
Mr. President, may I follow up with a question to the Senator?
Senator from Taylor, will you yield to another question?
I will yield.
Same question, just a clarification. So if Valley High School did the 20 days, those days would only count towards that Valley High School, not to the entire district.
You're correct.
And in the event that there is a classroom within Valley High School, that let's say that there was 20 students, and would they be permitted to do NTI? Those 20 students, would that count towards it? Because I think that's one of the issues right now is the schools won't want to use those NTI days up for those students, and I don't want to have my individual students at home quarantined with the inability to be able to follow instruction.
Senator from Taylor.
That's where the superintendent will need to decide in terms of using that. If you're closing for the entire district, that's an NTI day. But if you're targeting in on a specific grade, specific class, building, that's using your remote instructional day for that.
For the entire school.
There's a difference between the two.
Thank you, Senator.
Welcome.
Any other member seeking recognition for the purpose of question or discussion is yet to be previously recognized? Senator from Jefferson, 33.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator from Taylor yield to a question?
Senator from Taylor, will you yield?
I will yield.
Senator from Jefferson 33, he will yield.
Thank you. Senator from Taylor, do you have any particular insight as to how this COVID-19 or its variant will impact all aspects of the district, and to what extent?
Senator from Taylor.
Senator, with great appreciation and respect, I cannot answer what that effect would be on every different district, every different household, every different state, every different person. I cannot answer that.
Senator from Jefferson 33.
I'm not sure I understood the answer. Would that be a no?
I think I'm a pretty intelligent person, but in terms of the question that you posed me, I would have to answer no.
Would the senator yield to another question?
Senator from Taylor, will you yield?
I will yield.
Senator from Taylor, do you have the utmost confidence in the Kentucky Department of Education and its leadership as it now is constituted?
Senator from Taylor.
In terms of confidence to carry out procedures, protocols, I'm just trying to find out exactly what the intent of the question is.
If I'm allowed, I will.
Senator from Jefferson 33.
Well, you are aware that these are highly trained individuals that have the authority and responsibility for our educational system statewide, that each and every day they apply their expertise and make judgments in the interests of the children, the administrators, the teachers, the parents, the Commonwealth in the field of education. And I'm just wondering if you hold the same esteem and confidence that I have in them in making judgments. Do you?
Senator from Taylor.
Well, one of the things we've done here is with the temporary remote instruction, that's the suggestion that was given us by the Kentucky Department of Education is to utilize that in this bill. So we did get input. We did seek guidance. And so what we're working off here in this working product is upon their recommendation of what we're utilizing in this. So yes, in terms of listening to working with them, this was a part of the input that was received from them and was put into this.
So the answer is yes as to judgment, and that's it. Okay.
I also will say, I also value the judgment and the trust of superintendents, educators, school board members. We also, with this bill, are also giving them trust. And I think we all would say we trust superintendents to also do what's best. Yeah. And so not just the Department of Education, but also we put trust in our educational leaders across the Commonwealth as well.
I'd like to speak to the bill.
Please proceed.
I compliment the leadership of the Senator from Taylor, the Education Committee. I think that this bill does have significant degrees of flexibility. And obviously a lot of thought has gone into it. And it leaves me a little bit ambivalent, well, a lot ambivalent, because in my judgment, this bill has not gone far enough. I've expressed this before. I've been very transparent about that. And the reason why I take that position is because you just heard the Senator from Cabin, Taylor, express and join me with the thought that we have a very competent and experienced Kentucky Department of Education, its leadership. I think we both embrace that, and I think I could say that in relationship to his response to my question. He also indicated that he did not know, and I don't know, and it might have sounded facetious for me to ask the question, but quite frankly, I was trying to get it on the table to frame what I had to say here. And that is, we don't know the impact of COVID-19 and its variant. In fact, there's another variant here as well. We don't know. We didn't know months ago. We didn't know 2 months ago. We don't know next week. We don't know next month. We don't know November, December. Yet, we did not put the discretion, even though we trust the judgment of our leadership in the Kentucky Department of Education, who has the authority to supervise, basically, monitor, offer guidance, and all other kinds of things with respect to our education system. Certainly, the protection and health and welfare of our students, that's fundamental, and our teachers and our administrators. I made a comment that I thought some flexibility and some thoughtfulness had gone into this bill. I wasn't being facetious when I said that. I've said this before. However, it didn't go far enough. We have people in place that can deal with uncertainty. We know this is an uncertain situation. It's demonstrated itself over and over again, and yet, even though there are some that feel they do not want to vest that discretion in the governor of the Commonwealth, who I happen to have a lot of confidence in myself, but okay, we can disagree on that. But I can't understand how we would not give some capacity to the Commissioner of Education to deal with those things that are unforeseen, because we don't know what's going to happen between here and the next time we come back. That's a problem. Now, I'm concerned, of course, that we're moving along at, what, a 3-day cycle or to complete this process. You know, normally it takes about 5 days. And if we had those 5 days in there, and if we had a committee substitute that came in the third day, and even if we went to the next day, these amendments could be heard. And that's important to me, too, because I represent about 115,000 people, and they want to be heard. That's why I'm here. That's why each of us is here. Now, I understand we got to have, there has to be some management of the process. I understand that. It may have been done a little too tightly this time because it snuffed out my ability and others' abilities on both sides of the aisle to have their amendments considered. I would, I don't want to be critical. What I do want to say is that I think we ought to think about that, because we all here representing 115,000 people roughly each. We should have the right, whether you agree or not, to put an amendment on the floor for consideration. I remember when it was like that. I didn't mean it was perfect back in the day, Senator from Taylor. But now, I see this too much, and I'm just asking that we reconsider that approach. It doesn't hurt for us to hear it out and vote. You go to your caucus, you make your decisions, we make our individual decisions, we do this. But here's what we didn't get a chance to consider from my perspective. I wanted to put on the table, in my amendment, the ability to allow districts to go to a hybrid schedule of alternating students being in person and remote to allow for increased social distancing. And guess what? The districts must request approval from the Commissioner of Education for additional NTI days to implement the schedule. That would have meant that the Commissioner of Education, with all of his expertise, all of his training, after all, they searched around the country and hired this individual to do just what he is there to do, to make judgments. He does it all the time. Why would we not have at least a trigger in the process to accommodate the unknown that we don't know? Now, heaven forbid that bad things don't continue, but we know they will. But will they do that and fit in terms of the policy that we're outlining here in the particular bill that's on the floor? I don't know. And that's the point. I don't know. No one knows. The second piece was increase the remote instruction provisions in Senate Bill 1 from 20 days per district to 20 days per school in a district, which would have resolved the problem that was implicit in the question that was asked earlier of the senator from Taylor, and allow a district to request additional remote instruction days from the Commissioner of Education if needed due to COVID. Again, this is not an open-ended piece. This is a prudent piece, given the fact that we are under attack. Our children are under attack. Our teachers are under attack. Our administrators are under attack. In fact, everyone in this building is under attack from COVID and its variants. So I applaud significantly the work that's been done. I see some good things in the work that's been done. But I don't applaud the fact that I didn't have full ability to have my amendments considered on this floor. And I think we underestimate, or maybe we overestimate, our judgment when we're not going to be close to the ground if something adverse happens, when the people that are there are going to be handcuffed, except to the extent of this bill. And I hope with all my heart that I'm wrong, that possible outcome does not adversely affect the health and welfare and the lives of anyone in our school system and beyond. One last point, Mr. President. It's sort of a personal point, and it feeds into what I'm saying here. Over a year ago, see, what's today? September the 9th? In fact, over a year ago, about September the 7th or 8th, I came out of the hospital. Struck by, guess what? COVID-19. I took every step I could to avoid that, and then I stepped outside of my protection silo, and I can just about pinpoint where I got it. I want you to know, and I don't say this for any particular personal expression of, I wish you didn't go through that. But I want to tell you, it's the worst thing I've experienced in my entire life. And the doctors, I can say now, did not expect me to come out of it. They had me on 15 liters of oxygen. The next is the ventilator. Unfortunately for me, they didn't know then what they know now, but fortunately for me, what they did put together and what I signed off on, and I'm not sure everybody had it available to them at the time, but I would have signed anything at that time. It worked for me. But guess what? There are a lot of people out here that are unvaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated and still can get it. My doctor tells me, get vaccinated and wear that mask. And by the way, wash your hands and act like you never got a vaccination at all. He said, because we don't know. We do this every day. We don't know. The experts don't know. And that's what we're working against. We don't know. So I just suggest, Mr. President, or if I could humbly suggest, and let me point out, a number of members of this body have been struck by COVID. I've spoken to them individually. They know what I'm talking about. Some of them to a lesser degree, some of them just about equal when I hear the descriptions they've given me. I guess what I'm saying is this. When those children go to school, they're not just going to school and they're going to weather the storm. We know that there's 1 or 2% or somewhere in there that children are adversely affected in a way that they don't recover, let's say they're not impacted significantly. But guess what? They take it home. They take it to the grandparents. They take it to their parents. They take it to unvaccinated people. They take it to their friends. They take it to their they take it everywhere. They're not trying to hurt anybody. We have a responsibility beyond ourselves to everyone else. At least that's the way I was raised. I have a responsibility to my family. I got a responsibility to everybody on my block, a responsibility for everyone I meet, and I believe everybody in here feels that way. Because I've talked to you, I know you that much. But it has to be reflected in our policy. We got to lead. We shouldn't duck. We ought to lead. We ought to set the example. That's why we have the position we're in. High standard. That's what we have to do. We don't dumb anything down. You know why? Because we're under threat. And there are people running around out here that, that don't understand. As I told someone earlier, and I'll sit down, Mr. President, my sister-in-law bought me a T-shirt last Christmas, and I've been chuckling about it ever since, but it's so true. And on it says, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. And that's why we that know and understand, we need to lead, because we have a responsibility to everybody in the Commonwealth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other members seeking recognition for the purpose of question or discussion? Senator from Marshall.
Speak on the bill, Mr. President.
Please proceed.
Mr. President, I have complete faith in our local school districts to make the decisions related to COVID. They will have the same information that they've had available to them throughout this entire pandemic. They will not have threats that come along with some of the requirements that have been made in the past. If they do not follow the directives, they will have the ability to make the decisions themselves. These are the people that see the kids every day, that live next to their parents, to their families, that are responsible every day for these kids. They will go through great pains to make sure that the decisions that they make in every area of the COVID response for their school district is in the best interest of their children. I have no doubts about that whatsoever. Mr. President, there's one particular part of the bill, and I do want to compliment the senator from Taylor for his work on this bill and those that were involved. Great pains were gone through to make sure that everyone was heard during this process and to make sure that the best possible product was obtained. The senator from Taylor always puts forth excellent education-based legislation, and this is no exception. Not perfect, as he said, but very thoughtful, considerate, and thorough in the approach. Mr. President, Section 1 of the bill deals with early childhood education or child care. As most of you all know, over the last several weeks, been working with child care providers, with parents of children in child care, early childhood education, and also spoke with several medical professionals over the last few weeks. The product that we came up with was reviewed throughout the process, and the decision was made that in the end, that as of with this bill and as of today and what our plans are for early childhood education, this bill simply eliminates the most recent emergency regulation doing with mandatory masking within child care, and that's 902 KAR 213E for those providers who are watching this today. And basically it leaves the decision up to each individual center on how they will approach masking. And as of with this regulation or with this bill, centers will still be required all the regulations that are currently in place, as far as cleaning and the way they conduct their daily operations. The net effect of what this legislation will have is basically just do away with that emergency reg, and it will allow the cabinet, Dr. Sarah Vanover, with the Division of Child Care, to promulgate additional regulations as the division sees fit in response to the COVID pandemic. I've spent a lot of time talking with Dr. Vanover and talking about policies, and I believe that they will be prepared to promulgate regulations in response to the events as they should occur and as they should progress in relation to COVID. Mr. President, our child care centers throughout the state have handled this pandemic very well. They've protected our children as they always do. And I have no doubts that even though this particular legislation and how it responds is very limited, I have no doubts that they will make the right decisions and maintain policies within the centers, and they will be successful in protecting our children. And so they will be required to make the decisions related to COVID as we move forward. And I was afraid that there might be providers and parents out there that have questions as to what happened with any possible legislation dealing with early childhood education. And again, Mr. President, I would encourage all to support this piece of legislation. I have been in contact with superintendents from my district. They are thinking through this process. They're talking about what information is available to them to set up their policies, their procedures, and they're being very thoughtful. That's what they're paid to do. And again, they know their districts, and they will be able to adapt to fit what is best for their district, for their students, for their families. And I think that is the proper way for this Commonwealth to handle this pandemic in relation to our school system. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other members seeking recognition for the purpose of question or discussion? Senator from Jefferson 19.
Speak on the bill, Mr. President.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start off, because we do have some members of the press here today, that like any session, most of this session is actually, we're in agreement on a lot of things. I have a feeling, though, that what will get covered here today is where we have disagreement. When I say that most of what we're doing here this session we agree on, look at the Senate bills. There's 5 bills. I think 3 of them have nearly unanimous agreement on those bills. There's a lot of agreement within this bill, too. There are a lot of things that need to be done to help our schools, to give them some flexibility, to make sure the funding is there. I'm glad those are in this bill. There's some other things that, while good, could be better. And one of my complaints this session is that we're only here for 3 days, and we've rushed things through, and we haven't allowed amendments, because I think some of the amendments offered by my caucus should have been heard and would have had agreement. 2 of those amendments that I offered on this bill, the first one would have amended Section 7 on page 4, line 22 of the bill. Right now, we're requiring all staff, certified and classified staff, teachers, and all staff at a school, that we're requiring them, they have to perform the work on site, even if the school is operating remotely. Well, let's think back to what happened in 2020 and even in 2021. As school districts this year have closed, as schools have been closed, as daycares have been closed. Think of how many of these teachers and staff are young parents who don't have child care options for their own children because these schools are closed. I think we should have a provision in this bill that says if you can't find child care, then you should not have to come in if you can do your job remotely. I know that my wife and I were both incredibly grateful over the last year that we had employers allowing us to do our jobs remotely. I've also seen so many people and so many women who left the workforce because they didn't have these options. I don't think it's responsible of us to put it in statute to take away that flexibility. Look also at Section 8, page 5, line 15, where it says anybody employed by the school can teach in the classroom. If anything, over the last year, those of us who have kids of a certain age learned exactly how valuable teachers are. I do not think that we should allow just anyone to go in and provide instruction in the classroom. So I offered an amendment that would have changed the word instruction to non-instruction. Because if we do need to pull resources in to supervise a classroom in a non-instructional activity, maybe that's some of the flexibility we need. But I don't think it's good policy to say that just anybody can come into a classroom and provide instruction. I would have liked to have seen those. I think we could have gotten agreement on those and we could have made this a better product. But let's talk about the two big areas where there are some disagreement in this bill. And we know what they are. It's mask requirements and NTI days. And as we consider this legislation here today, we have to ignore the marble and the nice wood and the microphones because we don't operate in a vacuum. Look at where Kentucky is. As of today, we have 609,924 cases. We have 7,935 deaths, up from when we started just 2 days ago. The statewide positivity rate is 14.16%, again up from where we were when we started this session 2 days ago. There's 2,424 currently hospitalized, 674 of whom are in the intensive care unit, 431 of whom are on a ventilator. 10 school districts are currently closed. 40 school districts have been closed sometime this year. All but 3 of Kentucky's counties are in the red or worse. And the 3 that aren't in the red are in the orange. Now look, I want kids in school. I'll say it again, I want kids in school. I don't just say this as a policymaker, I say it as a parent. I lived through a full calendar year of NTI. I've been through the tears of teaching math to my children on both of our parts. I've been through the tears of them missing their friends and their sports and the activities. But here's the scary part. 50,382 students in Jefferson County Public Schools are not old enough to be vaccinated. Over 300,000 students statewide are not old enough to be vaccinated. But when we have over 600,000 cases of COVID, we have 674 people in the ICU, when Norton Children's Hospital is at capacity right now because this Delta variant is surging and it impacts kids. When over 300,000 of our kids are not old enough to be vaccinated. Why? Why are we debating a bill that takes away anyone's ability on the local or the statewide level to protect our kids? When we did House Bill 1, just this year, the majority in this chamber voted and said that to remain open in a state of emergency, which is what we're in, a school, a business, a nonprofit had to follow the guidance of the CDC or the executive branch, whichever was the least restrictive. Well, the guidance of the executive branch and the guidance of the CDC right now could not be clearer. To have kids safely in school, which is where we want them, you must wear a mask. And when over 300,000 of our students aren't old enough to be vaccinated, that's the only protection they have. I think it's irresponsible of us to take away the ability to protect our kids. I think it's an abdication of our duty, given the resources we have available to us here, to put all of this on the local school districts, many of whom, even though they're elected, are practically volunteers. We really want kids in school, and we do. If kids in school is what we want, then we have to be okay with them wearing masks right now, because we want them in school safely. But we turn it all over to local control. So I'm hopeful And I ask the school boards and the superintendents across this state to please keep our kids in school and safe. But if local control is really what we want, then why in the same bill are we not leaving the NTI days up to our local school districts? We say, and we've heard all throughout this chamber and debate on this bill, that we want local control, but in the bill it takes away NTI from our local school districts. Maybe it's not really about local control then. But given the goal of having kids in school, which is what we want, kids safely in school, then I do think we need to rework the NTI section, especially for a district like mine, Jefferson County Public Schools, where I graduated and where my kids attend. There's a classroom in St. Matthew's Elementary, where my twins are in elementary school, that has to quarantine. That counts as a day for the entire district. That could be problematic. And because it could be problematic, if we pass this into law, the only way to fix it is to call another special of the session of the state legislature, to wait at least 3 days while we debate a bill, and have 138 people in 2 different chambers vote to fix it. We're here right now. The clock has not run out. We have time to fix it, and we should. Because we want kids safely in school. You know the other reason? We asked for this. The General Assembly passed legislation that took the ability away from the executive branch to do this job. Legislature became the dog that caught the car. And now that we have the responsibility to do it, we have the responsibility to do it correctly. And good enough in this instant isn't good enough. Because no less than our kids' education and their lives depend on it.
Any other member seeking recognition for the purpose of question or discussion that has yet to be previously recognized? Seeing none, Senator from Taylor, I will come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Really quick, one point of clarification. This bill does not take away NTI. The district still has their 10 NTI days given to them statutorily. They still have those days. If they've used any up to this point of the school year, they have what's remaining. The 20 remote instructional days, and this is for Senator from Jefferson 37, those 20 days are per district. If 10 schools in JCPS, as an example, were to close today with remote learning, that counts as 1 day. If there were to be 3 middle schools closed tomorrow, that's 2 days. So as a point of clarification of what is available there still for districts to use for flexibility. If no further questions, I move for the final passage of Senate Bill 1 as amended by Senate Committee Substitute 1.
The matter of order of body is passage of Senate Bill 1. Senator from Taylor, did you call for the question? Okay. Still before the body, anybody seeking recognition that has yet to be previously recognized? Senator from Jefferson 37.
Thank you, Mr. President. Got that. Is there no further questions? And that is my notes based on my discussion on the floor with the senator from Taylor, and I appreciate the further clarification. My understanding was that for each day that would be used would be for that individual school. So in the event in Jefferson County, JCPS, with all its different schools, if one school has to use it for 1 day, that counts as one of the 20 days for all of Jefferson County? I see that as another major flaw in this, and again, the need for the amendments. Thank you.
Any other members seeking recognition? Seeing none. Matter for the body is passage of Senate Bill 1 as amended by Senate Committee Substitute Number 1. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Alvarado. Senator Berg.
Senator from Jefferson, 26. Sorry about that.
Thank you, sir.
Please cast your vote, then explain. Limited it to 2 minutes.
I would like to vote no, and I will speak very quickly. I really think, particularly the senator from Taylor, I think a lot of good effort has gone into this bill. And there are things in this bill that I would be more than happy to support. Unfortunately, I think we left the elephant in the room out of this bill and kicked it down the can so far that it is going to be impossible for people in my district to feel comfortable that they're going to be able to continue safely sending their children to school. Because by making this decision on masking, which is a basic public health tool that we have used across this nation for the history of this nation when it is appropriate, we have taken a basic public health tool. We have taken the responsibility for using that tool away from our governor, who was willing to put the responsibility on his shoulders. We took it away from him, and now we are refusing to put the responsibility on ours. And I think it is an absolute abdication of responsibility. I think you are asking for fights in school board meetings where parents are going to be intimidated, where school board members are going to be intimidated, where superintendents are going to be resigning. And we have seen this in other states, and it is not working. NPR had an article about it this morning. We need to be the adults in the room, and I think we have just given up that responsibility, and I'm embarrassed. I am embarrassed that we have done this. Thank you.
Senator Carpenter. Senator Carroll. Senator Caslin.
Senator from Davies, please cast your vote and then explain within the allotted time.
Permission to explain my aye vote.
Please proceed.
You know, as the primary sponsor of the bill that got us all up here today to represent the voices of our individual communities, from the urban areas to the rural areas, we're doing exactly that. We're debating pieces of legislation that affect every citizen across the Commonwealth. And as a sponsor of an amendment that didn't make it through, that's still part of the process, and I understand that. And the encouragement that I want to give to our parents who are listening at home, you now have the opportunity to go to your local school boards, to talk to your superintendents, and have your voices heard in your districts closest to your home. And that's what I would encourage everybody to do. Thank you.
Senator Embry. Senator Girdler. Senator Givens.
Aye.
Senator Harper Angel. Senator Higdon. Senator Hornback. Senator Howell. Senator Kerr.
Senator from Fayette, 12, please cast your vote and then explain within the allotted time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today I was able to get this to the floor because I think this debate is very important. I asked some questions there, and then after that I've asked some other questions, and I have talked, of course, with many of my constituents by written notes and by telephone and lots of ways. But when it all comes down, this conversation is important that we have in public. I don't feel like that everything can be said during this session that should be said. I don't think that if there were enough books and libraries in the world, we would ever be able to all say all the different feelings we have about this global pandemic. It is indeed what it is. But today, I want to urge everyone to wear masks. I want to urge everyone within the sound of my voice to please get vaccinated. On behalf and in honor of my friend Dylan, who is a student in Woodford County, and on behalf of my friend Ellis, who's a student at a private school in Fayette County, and especially in honor of my 3 grandchildren, Case, Dylan, and Davis, in Fayette County Schools. I vote no.
Senator McDaniel. Senator McGarvey. Senator Meredith. Senator Mills. Senator Neal. Senator Nemes. Senator Parrott. Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Schickel. Senator Schroeder. Senator Smith.
Senator from Perry, please cast your vote and then explain.
Yes, Mr. President, I rise to explain my no vote. This has been a very difficult issue, and it's had a lot of work done by some amazing people on it. The only issue I have is that we really wanted to work on 20 days. My area is a rural area. We get a lot of snowfall. We've got what's called the dark side of the mountain, where once the freeze sets in, it doesn't warm up until way on into the summer. But there's going to be issues with us on the schools where I wanted the flexibility on the 20 days. And I feel like there could be a chance in the House. Maybe there's not a chance in the House, but that's what I'm working for. I like a lot of the stuff in the bill. I just simply wanted to try to give us a little bit more flexibility so my superintendents, could surgically move through these schools as the different crises popped up. Thank you.
Senator Southworth.
Senator from Anderson, please cast your vote and then explain.
I'll be voting aye, and I'd like to explain.
Please proceed.
The main thing that I've had to consider in this bill is, obviously, we look at what's in the bill. And I had made some amendments because what's in the bill is certainly difficult for all of us to try to tangle out with. Some of it's great, some of it's not great, some of it could be much better, some of it is not what we want, but some of it does do things that we want. And the big issue here for me is what's not in the bill. And unfortunately, this is a special session for a special circumstance for a special amount of time. We can't bring all of the issues all the time. The largest issues, we're in the middle of a big funding study right now. Education delivery is in grave need of study. We're really on a precipice, I think, Mr. President, in education delivery entirely, and I'm looking into a lot of things related to that. Certainly, it's not outside the scope of this discussion, yet it's not ripe for full adjudication. And therefore, I am voting yes on this bill because what is in the bill, while it's not perfect, it at least meets my 50% plus one criteria and doesn't have negatives that pull away because of the work from our committee previously. And I just want to make sure it's clear, the amendments that I had filed, these are things that strengthen this bill that I have seen at the request of my constituents make sure to come before this body, and they're not coming forward. But at the same time, we are getting a few things done, although it's not what all needs to be done, and therefore I'm voting yes.
Senator Stivers. Aye. Senator Storm. Aye. Senator Thayer. Aye. Senator Thomas. Senator Turner. Aye. Senator Webb.
Senator from Carter, please cast your vote and then explain.
I'm going to vote aye today on the bill, even though I'm very conflicted, and there are provisions that are inconsistent with some of my previous positions as far as local control. I've been a proponent of local control, voted no on a couple of bills, broke from the majorities of both caucuses from time to time on local control. And again, I'd like to see more NTI local control, but I do have a lot of faith in my school district leaderships in my district on masking, and I would encourage that. And I will work with local authorities to see that's done. I think some of these provisions, at least temporarily, hopefully undermine education. That's already been hit on. But what I do like about the bill, even though I have serious physical concerns about Test to Stay, I'm anxious to see how the pilot program goes forward, because some of the cost estimates are a little heavy on my physical mind, but in some districts it will work better than others, and we need to monitor that closely. We'll be back here in a few months. We've got 100 or so days until we come back, and less instructional days due to Thanksgiving, Christmas holidays. So I think we can probably live with this measure. But I'm encouraged by the mention of health departments. I've been here a long time, and I've seen our health departments cut. I've seen our health departments talked about. I've heard people even want to do away with our health departments. So now here we are, dependent on our health departments and incorporating them in the solution. So I hope that we can keep that up and acknowledge the good work that they're doing and help fund them to do this work. So right now, and with the caveat of monitoring it from a physical standpoint, and we can be back here to fix what goes wrong shortly, I vote aye.
Senator West. Senator Westerfield. Senator Wheeler. Senator Wilson. Senator Wise. Senator Yates.
Senator from Jefferson, 37, please cast your vote and then explain.
Mr. President, I vote no. Up to just a few minutes ago, I was pretty conflicted on this, back and forth. I kept, even in my own caucus, I talked about if this didn't pass, we're in a worse spot. We need to move forward and try to give our schools more flexibility to handle this ever-changing virus. Truth is, we never know what the future holds. That's never been so true as it is right now as it relates to this ever-changing virus and how it affects our children, our general commonwealth, our country. Even the experts are having to change over and over again. We took that authority away from the governor, put it to this body. Now we're promulgating that authority to the local level, which would be not so bad, except for we're removing so much of the oversight, the checks and balances, and the ability that we may have to do to change that comes down the pike. So with that inability to adjust creates a problem. When it was explained to me as an area as big as JCPS, that in the event there's an outbreak or one or two elementary schools and they have to use those non-traditional learning days, that would count to the entire district. I think that is just a problem in the bill that would have been fixed had we had the chance to be able to argue the amendments. With that, the hope that maybe the House fixes that here and comes back to us, I will vote no. If it does pass, I hope that when we come back in session, we can fix that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other member seeking recognition to cast, change, or explain their vote? Seeing none, there being 28 yeas, 8 nays, Senate Bill 1 as amended by Senate Committee Substitute 1 is passed. Senator from Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 2 be taken from its place in the orders of the day, read for the third time by title only, and placed upon its passage.
Mr. Clerk, would you please report Senate Bill 2?
Senate Bill 2, an act relating to COVID-19 emergency actions and declaring an emergency.
Senator from Scott.
Mr. President, please ask the clerk to report Senate Committee Substitute Number 1 to Senate Bill 2.
Mr. Clerk, please report Senate Committee Substitute 1 to Senate Bill 2.
Senate Committee Sub 1 to Senate Bill 2.
Senator from Scott.
Move for its adoption.
Matter for the body is adoption of Senate Committee Substitute Number 1. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Senate Committee Substitute Number 1 is adopted. Senator from Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate floor amendments 1 through 7 are drawn to the original bill. So now that we have adopted Senate Committee Substitute Number 1, they are out of order.
So your motion is for the chair to declare...
So I'd like to make a motion that due to the fact that they are out of order, that they be withdrawn.
Without objection, the ruling of the chair is that the amendments were drafted to the bill, not the committee substitute, which is now before the body. Therefore, they are withdrawn as out of order. Senator from Scott.
I yield to the senator from Clark for action and explanation on the bill.
Senator from Clark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to begin my remarks by noticing the comments from the senator from Jefferson 19 who said, look at where we're at as a state right now. If you don't like where the statistics are, just take a look at who's been driving the bus up until about 2 weeks ago in this state. The governor has been controlling this situation, and clearly if you don't like where we're at, we know that it's a result of his plan. And I would invite my friends from the left about taking a look at this process that say that basically that it act like science and that medicine is black and white in this situation. They think that everything is an all or none when it comes to the practice of medicine, but it's not. How we treat medicine and approach medicine, there's sciences behind it and studies that are behind it, but it's also based on a medical preponderance of opinion. And right now there's a medical preponderance of opinion that I would agree with on vaccinations and that people should get vaccinated. So people who are watching at home, I'd encourage you, please, go out and get your vaccines. Mathematically, it gives you the best options for treatment, for prevention of disease, and for survival. We've only got about 57% of this state currently vaccinated. Why not more, is my question. Why aren't more people getting vaccinated? Maybe it's because some folks that are not vaccinating at this point are tired of the daily scolding that they get, implying that they hate their children, that they hate their neighbors, that they hate other people if they don't do what they're being told to do without questioning it. If a physician did that to you in their office, they'd say that you'd have horrible bedside manner. You probably would be called a bully, really, with a God complex, perhaps, if they did something along those lines, just dismissing people's concerns, calling them things like insane, ignorant, obstinate. That's not how you address people's needs. As physicians, we're not to the point where if someone, we're used to giving advice and people not following that advice. And we're not taught to demean those individuals, dismiss them, and call them names. We're taught to address those concerns and those issues, try to break down the barriers, explain why we think this is the best option and course for them. Going on television every day is not how you move the needle on this issue. Now, Senate Bill 2 is an attempt to try to correct the course of action where we're going and to try to make some progress out of the ditch that we're currently in. It's not a perfect bill. I filed another bill during this session, but I think it gets to what we're trying to get done. When you treat a disease or a disorder, you have prevention, and then you have also the treatment of the acute disease. We've been focusing quite a bit on prevention. The governor's office has been doing a lot of that, not a lot of focus on acute treatment once you have the disease. In the past 2 to 3 weeks, I've had an opportunity to speak to a lot of hospitals, a lot of chief medical officers, physicians, infectious disease doctors that I've worked with and trust. And they've given us a list, overwhelmingly, of the things they think needs to be done to help move this state forward. One of the problems they currently have is they don't have enough testing kits of COVID-19. They're running through them like crazy. Our hospital ERs are packed. They can do PCR tests, which will take 4 to 5 hours to get a result. But often for someone who's on the fence of whether or not they have COVID, they need a fast answer in a COVID test kit. They can't find them. They're asking for help in that regard. My infectious disease doctors acknowledge that people are showing up to our ERs with acute illness. They don't have enough beds, actually staffed beds, I should say. They don't have enough personnel to help handle that. They're asking for help with things like monoclonal antibody therapy and saying, please help us. Our hospitals are overwhelmed. We don't have the personnel to do it. We've got to find a way to get that established more quickly, to get more people treatment before they get acutely ill. Once they're low on oxygen, once they're short of breath, once they require hospitalization, it's too late for that treatment option. We need to get them that medication sooner. On the prevention side, they're asking for doctors' offices, primary care offices, to have vaccinations in hand. Much of the conversations that we're having when it comes to prevention is being done by politicians. And frankly, I think people at home are tired of listening to our politicians. Myself as a physician, a lot of people will look at me wearing a mask and get upset that I wear a mask. They'll get upset when I recommend vaccinations. Why? They may not like the letter after my name. And that's true of anybody in this chamber. We've lost the effectiveness because of what's happened on the first floor from someone who's on television every day, berating people every day, and they get tired of hearing that. The People who should be having these discussions are our primary care providers and our physicians. From the very beginning, they should have been having those. A much smarter opportunity would have been to have those people front and center to deliver the message of the importance of the science that we talk about. We also have, like I mentioned, a personnel shortage. I think a lot of our